Welcome to InfoGist. The Chinese government, facing an expected seventh consecutive monthly increase in youth unemployment, said Tuesday that it had suspended the release of the information instead. The unemployment rate among 16 to 24-year-olds in urban areas hit 21.3%, a record, in June, and has risen every month this year. It was widely forecast by economists to have climbed further last month. China's youth unemployment rate has doubled in the last 4 years, a period of economic volatility induced by the zero-COVID measures imposed by Beijing that left companies wary of hiring, interrupted education for many students to get the internships that spokesmen had often led to job offers. The struggle for young people to find work shows concern about the Chinese economy, the world's second largest. It is flagging 7 months after the government abruptly ended the zero-COVID push, plagued by falling exports and souring consumer confidence, as well as a dangerous condition known as deflation or chronically lower prices. The data on youth unemployment is not the first economic report suspended this year by the Chinese authorities. This spring, the National Bureau of Statistics halted the public release of monthly consumer confidence readings, a series it launched 33 years ago. China's policymakers have introduced measures to lift confidence and boost youth employment, such as offering subsidies to encourage private sector companies and state-owned enterprises to hire more and pressuring colleges and universities to do more to help graduates get jobs. But the economy has been slow to respond. Private companies in China, which contribute 80% of the country's urban employment, were hit especially hard by the lockdowns and mass testing that marked zero COVID. On top of the damage inflicted on the job market during the pandemic, the government cracked down on the country's technology, real estate, and education industries, where educated young Chinese had flocked for jobs. The regulatory actions caused hundreds of thousands of layoffs and left companies and investors more cautious about expanding their businesses. When businesses are wary, hiring typically suffers.
As tens of millions of Chinese youths leave school, jobs are few and far between.
反正职位就那么多，你学校好，那我学校比你更好。
More than 1 in 5 are now officially unemployed, dashing their hopes for a better life.
你面前有很多路，选项很多，但没有一个是属于你的选择。
How did the world's second largest economy end up here?
The post-COVID recovery has been weaker in China than in many other countries. No question about that.
And will it spell disaster for China and its leaders?
Economists have found strong links between youth unemployment rate and drugs crime rate and many other issues. It goes beyond the young people themselves. It's very costly to the society.
It's graduation season, a bittersweet time for students to bid farewell to some of their best friends and say goodbye to campus life.
一定要把我这个非必要不劳动拍齐了。
Parents watch their children in cap and gown with immense pride in their hearts, even when they can't personally show up.
毕业典礼了哈，毕业典礼了，给我爸妈看看，毕业典礼了。
But behind the pomp and pageantry, there's far more bitter than sweet in China. As 11.6 million students, the highest number on record, finish tertiary education this year, the government decided to halt the release of youth unemployment data.
全国青年人等分年龄段的城镇调查失业率将暂停发布， 主要的原因呢，是由于经济社会在不断的发展，统计工作需要不断完善，劳动力调查统计也需要进一步的健全优化。
Before the announcement, urban youth unemployment hit a record-breaking 21.3% in June. And economists were expecting a further uptick once this year's graduating cohort joined the workforce.
If you look at historical trends of youth unemployment in China, so you see that peaking in July and then coming down again towards the end of the year. So it's quite consistent and quite conceivable that we will see a run-up for the next few months.
These graduates, though, don't need a data point to tell them it's a tough jobs market out there. The student on the left goes by the alias Shami. Like most Chinese graduates, his job search began last fall, well before graduation. But by February, frustrated by the fruitless hunt, he posted a video online.
今天呢，我去参加了一个上海市的人才招聘会，灭绝了我最后一丝求职的信心。别的不说哈，咱就看这个乌泱泱的人群啊，我上回见这种阵仗还是黑灯瞎火被抓去捅嗓子眼的时候。
The video went viral, garnering close to 500,000 views on video site Bilibili.
堂堂星巴克举世闻名，一个中杯的什么拿铁就要个30-40，结果开工资月薪2500。
我一直都很清楚，火的不是我，而是求职难这个事情。当群体情绪一直在酝酿要爆发的时候，它是缺一个燃点的，我是那个燃点。
A son of farmers from the remote countryside of Shandong province, Shami is one of the few people in his village to have gone to university and received higher education.
啊，中了不是毕业典礼中了，然后毕业证和学位证过2天才能发。这就考上1个生都是啥？哎，你也都没去着嘞。毕业生1年1万个1嘛。他觉得不可思议。哎，按理说研究生、高材生嘛，肯定少点儿。这就是农民的局限性。
There's a saying in Chinese, 知识改变命运, knowledge can rewrite your destiny. And Shami certainly had hoped that would be his case.
当时也比较乐观，我开始找工作啊，我3个月总能找到了吧，对不对？哎，结果3个月之后又3个月，找了半年多也没找到。
半年多是投了多少简历
？200份绝对是有了。你面前有很多路，选项很多，但没有一个是属于你的选择。绷得很紧，每天都绷得很紧。反正我就记得这句话：梦醒了，无路可走。当时就是觉得无路可走了。
As recently as 2019, youth unemployment in China was just about 10%. But 4 years and a global pandemic later, the figure has doubled to 21.3%. It continued rising even after the country abandoned the zero-COVID policy in December 2022 and reopened its economy, which came as a surprise as most countries experienced an acute labor shortage post-pandemic. All that means the young person in China today is less likely to find a job than its counterparts in almost all major developed economies.
This group is unique because they got especially hammered by zero COVID policies. Young people tend to be employed disproportionately in the services sector. So, they're working at a restaurant, they're working at a movie theater. The reason that became an issue was because during the zero COVID policy, the local governments received a mandate from the central leadership. That mandate was you have to control COVID. So first thing that always goes is any kind of consumer-facing retail services sectors. Service is always the first to go.
The post-COVID recovery has been weaker in China than in many other countries. And therefore, the recovery in employment for the youth has been less vigorous than almost everywhere else. No question about that.
A few weeks ago, just before he graduated, Shami finally landed a job with a parcel delivery company.
从211文科硕士到快递小哥，对，有什么落差？到手个几千块钱工资，不到1万块钱，就是我努力攒，我才能一个月多剩2000块钱。
In today's Shanghai, where he lives, Shami will have to save for 2 years just to afford 1 square meter of housing. Owning a home seems completely out of reach.
没有很满意，也没有不满意，很淡然，但是压力一下子就释放，因为你知道你有路可走了，这个很重要，这个感觉我是有的。
Shami has a master's degree, which already gives him a leg up over millions of undergraduates. In today's jobs market, employers increasingly require at least a master's for office jobs, even when the position hardly justifies it. The so-called degree inflation is infuriating to job seekers, but it's become somewhat of a necessity to employers due to the sheer number of applicants vying for limited vacancies. For example, in March, 7.7 million people applied for just 200,000 government jobs across China.
那对于企业来讲的话，它有招聘成本，我可没有那么多时间来招你的。 我很忙的，所以的话呢，那我从硕士里边挑呗。我也知道，那比如说有的本科，包括我带的很多本科的孩子很优秀嘛，但是对我企业来讲，我没有时间去发现你的。
Xu Hongfei is an employment consultant helping fresh graduates navigate the cutthroat competition for jobs.
竞争的话越来越强，毕业生人数上，从我毕业那年09年，我毕业那年是600万出头，现在是那个差不多有1200万了，快。反正职位就那么多，你学校好，那我学校比你更好；你实习好，我实习比你更好，就卷这个东西。薪酬方面的话，也没有太大的涨幅，涨了一些，没有太大涨幅。
没有涨过通货膨胀的。
那肯定涨不过吧？你一次就考上了，对吧？我看你这个。
对。
Xu is currently working with 200 paid clients and gets new inquiries on a weekly basis.
就是我要不要继续待在建筑行业？
如果说呢还想进行一个土木的话，回到建筑行业的话呢，比较尴尬这个简历，因为你是女孩，去基层不太容易去，一般要基层要男生，能够吃苦一些。 绝大多数的企业只要最新鲜的应届生，比如说今年秋招我们只要24届的，你别说你22届的，23届都过季了。
The unlucky job seeker goes by Ling Shan, also her online alias. She began to study civil engineering in 2015 during the height of China's property boom, but only graduated with a master's when the market had come to a sudden and chaotic bust.
为什么要学土木？脑子进水啊！一开始想着去房地产公司，然后我毕业之后，房地产公司就开始炸了，就这样，就是完全就是什么红利、什么行业红利都没吃到，一毕业就赶上挨打了。有几个同学里面签到房地产公司都是直接被割了，就这样的一个情况。
According to Chinese media reports, the country's top 50 property developers cut 200,000 jobs in 2022 alone. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel as millions of homes stand unfinished and prices continue to decline. That makes Ling Shan a typical case of what economists call skills mismatch, having studied to acquire a skill set that is no longer in demand. While that could happen in any country, it's an especially acute problem in China right now. In recent years, the government has pushed for drastic changes to the country's economy. Aside from the property crackdown that has led to an implosion of the housing market, China has also killed off the after-school tutoring industry, kneecapped its once fast-growing tech giants such as Tencent and Alibaba, and reined in its vast financial sector, which led many banks to shrink.
Some of the questionable economic policies also contribute to the rise of the youth unemployment rate. These industries used to be very vibrant, absorb a lot of young workers. One of the largest of the companies is the New Oriental Education Group, New York-listed company. In 2021 alone, they laid off over 60,000 workers.
Nevertheless, China has a shrinking population, which has raised alarms about a persistent labor shortage. Yet Chinese youths can't find jobs. How could both things be true at the same time? Youth unemployment is on a tear in China. It has continued rising even after the pandemic. All that more curious because China's overall jobless rate has been on the mend.
In almost every country, the youth unemployment rate will be higher than the overall unemployment rate. The young people, they lack the connection or social networks that are sometimes necessary to help them find a job. So naturally, they are in a very disadvantaged position.
They are less experienced, so they tend to be employed into maybe more of an entry-level jobs. So these are really the first jobs to go when a downturn hits. So really, they are more vulnerable in a way.
According to data compiled by Chinese job site 51Job, 60% of China's top 100 companies cut back on campus recruitment in 2023, with a few not hiring any fresh graduates at all.
我直观的感觉校招的规模是有一些缩减，可能跟大环境有关。从企业方面来讲的话，校招和社招，企业肯定是倾向于社招。我有个事儿搞不定，对吧？我把你招过来，你帮我把它搞定。应届生呢又不一样，资源没有，经验没有，但是为什么要校招呢？那企业总得有些社会责任吧？但是呢，比如说民营企业，他自己可能快活不下去了，他就不会想给自己负担了。
But while it's harder for young people to find a job almost everywhere, the 21.3% youth unemployment rate in China now is far from normal.
In China, it is now really quite high given its level of income, and that's almost 4 times the average unemployment rate in China. So we're now looking at quite an unusual phenomenon.
"22-year-old Ma Youhu is entering the workforce this year, and he's already running into walls."
电子厂干过很多。
电子厂、化工行业干过没有？
那没有。
以前的操作工主要的工作内容是什么？
白班、夜班还是倒，就是操作机台、苹果手机后置的摄像头的那个线圈，还有昆山联涛式流水线那一种。
那就是你这个工作内容和化工行业的工作内容差的还是挺多的。
Ma has an associate degree for which he spent 3 years in a tertiary vocational training institution. That qualifies him as a college graduate, but he's finding that his options are limited.
那些本科生都很难找工作，我们才一个大专生，本科生都很难找，就是一般都不要，还说我们人家也只能接受现实吧，没办法。
Ma is a product of China's ambitious plan that is expanding its tertiary education massively in the last 2 decades. Back in 2000, only 8% of the cohort could get into college. But in 20 years, the figure has risen 8-fold to 64% in 2021. In the last decade, China has quickly caught up with Japan and is now approaching the level of Germany.
当前我国接受高等教育人口达到2.4亿人，高等教育助力我国劳动力素质结构发生了重大变化。
But this has created a mismatch. While there are almost 2 jobs for each job seeker in China overall, for college graduates like Ma, the ratio is inverted, with almost 2 applicants chasing 1 opening.
For people entering the labor force now, they are far better educated than those leaving the labor force. Leaving the labor force now, they've got about 6 to 7 years of education. Entering the labor force, they have about 12 years of education. That's good for China's growth in the medium term. And yes, there might be some issues of frictional unemployment, some temporarily over-education, if you want.
In other words, China has prepared a workforce for a high-income economy, but it's not one yet. Meanwhile, employers are struggling to draft young blue-collar workers as older workers retire.
可能很多就是想做一个办公室的工作，但是像销售，我们急缺的销售特别抵触，就想找既轻松又舒服，然后呢又有节假日双休，还有工资还能高一点、清闲一点的工作吧，就是稍微有挑战一点的都感觉不适合自己。
就是他对自己的期望值过高，自己收入过高。 我们职位的岗位工资也就在4000左右，但是呢，我们好多求职者对自己的期望工资还是挺高的，比如说他们期望1个月拿到7、8千、6、7千，达不到这样的，他们不去试用。
The high expectations for pay and comfort are on clear display at this tertiary training school in China's southwest. Chang studied elderly care, a booming industry in China as the population enters rapid aging.
我宣布，2023届学生毕业典礼现在开始。 The
school says all its graduates can be put into a job tomorrow, except many aren't interested in putting their degree to use.
你像我们这专业出来还能干啥？当护理员啊！当护理员，你是不想娶媳妇了？你是不想当光棍儿？你就当护理员，一辈子都想当光棍，他就当护理员。就他那点工资，哎，多养只猫都养不活，养自己都养不活，还养猫。半夜睡3个小时起来看1次老人，哎呀，这谁受得了嘛？这年轻人确实受不了。他是1个月8000，你让我一直端手端脚，我都
要得1个月8000，你想吧。我为什么反感从事养老这专业呢？第一个是原因是因为薪资过低，然后时间比较长，需要24小时待命，还有夜班那些，然后实习薪资也比较低，只有1500到2000，然后转正也最多3000多。当代年轻人就和他父母那一辈不一样嘛，被父母宠得太好了，然后吃苦可能就没这么容易吃很大的苦，一点苦就受不了啊。比如说我也是这样。
as countries grow into becoming a middle-income economy and it aspires to be a high-income economy, the expectations of people also change. And that means that they expect to have a job that has a certain level of income and a certain type of activity that is hard to match.
Chang is more fortunate than most of his peers. He can rely on his parents, who own 2 restaurants. They had hoped to help him open his own care center after graduation, but 3 years of COVID lockdowns drained the family's coffers. So now Chang is stuck with a degree he doesn't know what to do with.
强制啊，强制后面要干嘛呀？
不晓得，看我先把暑假2个月过了，看家里的安排。
For now, Chang joins China's growing ranks of full-time sons and daughters, united under the slogan, "Instead of being unwanted by society, I'd rather be pampered by my mommy and daddy."
我的主业是全职女儿，主打一个高质量陪伴。
最近不是不要上班吗？所以我就一直睡到自然醒。
算起来，我辞职做全职女儿已经半年了。总的来说，雇佣双方都挺满意的。你们可能都觉得
Youth unemployment is a bit of a luxury problem, so richer countries have more of it. China is a higher middle income country. Per capita income almost $11,000, so that is quite substantive. Therefore, a lot of families can actually afford to have their graduated son or daughter to be unemployed for a bit.
So I mean, I think that's cute as an anecdote, but the bigger macro picture is that China faces a big budget constraint. You could have parents who are willing to, I guess, tolerate, so to speak, their child's unemployment for a bit longer. But at a certain time, family incomes do dwindle. And so that push, if not present today, will become a lot more intensified further down the road.
When the bank of mom and dad runs low on cash, will the young and jobless spell disaster for China and its leaders?
When the young unemployment rate is high, it poses a threat to the social and political stability. And that was one of the factors contributing to Arab Spring.
After 40 years of rapid economic growth, the Chinese economy is slowing dramatically. It grew less than 1% on quarter in the second quarter of 2023. Even the supply of blue-collar jobs are now dwindling. In a countryside of Ningxia, 21-year-old Ma Cunjun is handling an unfamiliar task, minding the cornfield.
这你看着，这好好都死过了，你看，好没有？这就这玉米，你看。
Much like his older brother Ma Youhu, he hasn't had much luck finding work this year, even though in 2022, before he graduated from high school, he had done a summer stint in a coastal city of Xiamen at a factory that made the camera for the iPhone.
第一个月拿了4000多，后面都是5000多。我给家里人给了1万，然后自己买了个手机。 然后今年下去就不要，今年那个厂不要。
During much of the pandemic years, China grew its exports. But come 2023, as Western economies teeter on a recession and more countries seek to de-risk their economic dependence on China, Chinese exports have taken a hit, down 14.5% in July. July was also the month the younger Ma finished high school and headed back to Xiamen to try and find a stable job.
然后我在下面待着，就待了1个月，每天就在房子里睡着，有时找个日结干了，下去干了4天日结汗，之后我妈就叫着回家了。
Ma's home is in Shihaigu, on the Chinese lowest plateau. It's one of the driest places in China, which makes living off the land especially difficult. Today, Ma will set out for the city again to try his luck, this time to Ningxia's capital, Yinchuan.
我上次是自喝起个做吃，够了你，这来就是够了，
还要咋整？
我闲着呢，够了，够了，够了。
这些啥石头厚了？
这些啥石头厚了呢？
While he's in the countryside, Ma isn't counted towards China's urban youth unemployment, which only service those living in cities and towns.
A lot of people, if they are unemployed in urban areas, they leave the urban areas. And once they lose their job, they go back to the countryside, back to their place of origin. That's the outlet, if you want, for unemployment. So those you don't measure. That's a Chinese characteristic that is also hard to actually measure correctly, even if you'd want to. But it does distort the statistics a little bit.
To be considered unemployed in China, one has to be actively seeking work in the past 3 months. Those who are not are excluded from the count. To be sure, this complies with the standards set by the International Labour Organization. And by this definition, only 1/3 of the 16 to 24-year-old age group, about 32 million people, are in the workforce, of which more than 6 million are unemployed. But according to analysis by Peking University, among the 64 million youths that are considered out of the workforce, 16 million are not going to school, so they could also use a job. Taken together, more than 22 million Chinese youths could be sitting idle.
When the young unemployment rate is high, it poses a threat to the social and political stability. And that was one of the factors contributing to Arab Spring. So the Chinese government is very concerned. I believe this is one of their top priorities.
At 21.3%, China's youth unemployment rate currently sits just a hair below the 23.4% in the Arab world in 2010. Then revolution erupted across the region, toppling governments one after another. In fact, China doesn't have to look that far to see the effects of youth discontent. In 1989, confronted by a faltering economy, the Chinese government ended the practice of assigning jobs to college graduates. Instead, young people had to go into the market and look for employment. That change prospect was a major factor behind the student movement that occupied Tiananmen Square.
There were maybe some broader concerns, like we saw last year, November, with the white paper protest. That was largely led by university students that are, of course, always a little bit more revolutionary than the average population. So I think that is one concern. So in other words, we're not talking about masses of unemployed that sort of take the street in protest. Frankly, I think that is still a very low probability.
For now, young people in China have mostly been venting their frustrations through internet memes. They've likened themselves to Kong Yiji, a much derided fictional figure set in the late Qing dynasty. He studied for the imperial exam, wore the scholar's robe, but lived in dire poverty because he couldn't get a scholar's job. It even spun a popular rap song with the line, "I studied to build my country, not to do food delivery." Alarmed by the discontent, the government swiftly censored the song and directed state media to issue a rebuke, telling young people to take off their scholars' robes and work in manual labor if that's the only work they can get. But what can China really do to get the youths working again?
1分钱没赚就损失了1000多块钱。
At least 1 in 5 Chinese youths are out of a job, and the Chinese government urgently wants to put them back to work.
The youth made up about 20% of total consumption in China, so a big part of consumption is out of the workforce. So that does affect the extent to which consumption can be a driver for growth in the long term.
There's a scarring effect. Your skill may be obsolete after a long period of unemployment, so it will have a long-lasting effect. Their income will not be able to recover to the normal level, even 10 years or 15 years of the work experience. Economists have found strong links between youth unemployment rate and the drugs crime rate and many other issues, social issues. It goes beyond the young people themselves. It's very costly to the society.
In Henan, the government staged a 100-day campaign to achieve zero unemployment. In Sichuan, the governor has asked companies to hire as many as possible and as early as possible.
They've now provided subsidies for employers to hire the youth. They have ordered state enterprises to hire more youth in internship positions. And some provinces have even encouraged the youth to go out to the countryside and find a job.
Returning to the countryside evokes some not so pleasant memories in China. In 1968, to relieve the pressure on urban jobs, Mao Zedong started the Return to the Countryside movement. In the next decade, 16 million youths were made to leave the cities they grew up in and work as farmers in rural areas, where they suffered from cold, hunger, and at times brutal treatment. In the end, the policy didn't solve China's employment problem, it merely delayed it. In 1978, when the policy was finally abandoned, the youths returned to the cities, angry and jobless. It's an episode Chinese leader Xi Jinping had personally experienced. He said it helped build his character as he called on today's youths to do the same.
That's different, of course, from the sending down the countryside during the Cultural Revolution, but nevertheless, it was a bit of a surprise when I read that into the newspaper.
Some youths have heeded the call.
大家好，我是超，我是鸭。第一批鸭子这里啊。对，第一批鸭子送鸭苗的地方哈。然后这些鸭子的话，咱们是要养多久？48天。48天是吧？
Chao and his friends recently came to the countryside of Jiangxi to work with a producer of salted ducks, a local delicacy. They hope to find a bigger market for it through live streaming and have been working to create an online following on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok.
精英都在往城市走，对不对？但是农村啊，包括小地方啊、小县城啊，它基本上都是一些年龄偏大的人，但是就行业精英的话会偏少一点，所以说我觉得这就是机会嘛。
现在这个整个板牙厂的生意规模有多大？
目前，每年的话大概是在20万只左右。
你们加入以后，他们的目标是多少呢？
他们说今年是50万只。
那目前这几个月的尝试，你的粉丝量涨了多少？
涨了1800。
The job starts with raising ducklings, something they know nothing about.
也感受这个路很陡，然后的话，它这个货车上不去，然后的话，我们就用人力推啊，耽误了差不多3个小时左右。然后我们车的话没有做防晒嘛，鸭子可能那么热。
3小时损失了550只。
对，550只。
真的看得很心疼的，很心痛的。
3.5块一个，这直接损失了1000多块钱
是
，1分钱没赚就损失了1000多块钱。
Until recently, Chow and his friends ran a dance school for kids, a lucrative business till China cracked down on the after-school tuition business.
我们做一场活动3天的话，最少下来的话，有多的时候的话有8、9万块钱，10多万块钱都有。但是我们当时团队是4个人嘛，我们是一个小工作室，就4个人。现在几乎可以说是每个月基本上就是在投入的状态，就是自己的话，就是没有什么利润。
假设就是如果回乡这种创业，它如果不成功，那你下一步会觉得要打算怎么走呢？
一定要成功，一定要成功，不会不成功的，一定要成功。对吧？
加油干吧！
That a lot of China's success has been getting people to move from the countryside to the cities, from agriculture to manufacturing and to services, which has much higher productivity. If you try to encourage people to go back to the countryside, that would be a drop in productivity. And probably in the long term, that would not be a good strategy for high productivity growth that the government's looking at. I think the other policy measures, such as wage subsidies and providing temporary employment in state enterprises, is not such a bad deal. Of course, much better would be if demand were to pick up and jobs would be created in a more natural way. For that, a much broader package of reforms, maybe a little bit of stimulus, would be necessary.
For now, the Chinese government has lowered interest rates and signaled support for private businesses. But such measures will take time to bear fruit. Meanwhile, for the youths who remain jobless, some have turned to unusual ways to make a buck.
谢谢投喂，直播骗泡面钱，那肯定了。今天的泡面钱有了，甚至还能加个肉。谢谢投喂，20块钱。
Industry like live streaming, just like athletics and so forth, you're going to bump up against the economics of superstars. So a few people are just going to rake it in, they're going to kill it. Most people are going to be treading water, maybe even below water. So it's not necessarily a viable industry.
While she waits for her days of online superstardom, Lingshan does what she can to stretch her money by hunting for discounts on the online shopping platform Taobao.
我有个淘宝号，取名叫薅姐，就是薅羊毛的薅，就是用各种的红包啊，就是你可以用比较低于市面价格的钱去买到一些 生活物资，就比如说洗衣粉呐、洗衣液啊，你有时候领个红包，可能几毛钱、几分钱就能买到，就这种的。墨汁9分钱，毛笔2毛钱，就是全方位的去压低自己的生活的消费啊，各个方面。又不社交，又不出去吃东西，又不买房，又不结婚，能干嘛的？就只是吃吃饭呐、紧紧的够活着，就这种程度。
Yeah, so what you want is successful young people leaving university or school and getting a job, and then you get married, you get an apartment, you get kids, you get in a car. Once you get off that train, that of course will not happen.
As for the Ma brothers, they've reunited in Yingchuan, the capital of Ningxia. The younger Ma's trip to the city has paid off, having found work at a construction site.
给我以前个地址给几日钱，你发了3遍，给他发3遍。
The elder Ma, having spent 3 more years in school and tens of thousands of dollars on tuition, isn't willing to take the same kind of job. For him, the search continues.
妈还妈是那种，我上的学这长时间的，接的是对，接的是对账。就想个办法，啥做一个啥好的，不是还让人家说，哎，操职业嘛，不能是咋来咋来的。对。